The Kremlin's military budget is going into a steep dive. The EU has approved one of the toughest sanctions packages against Russia and has dropped the price cap on Russian oil to rock bottom. The paranoid was foaming at the mouth. Putin's lackey Dmitry Medvedev had another meltdown. No one was spared. Xi Jinping wants to arrange a meeting with Trump and Putin in September, right after the expiration of the 59-day ultimatum from the US president. Coincidence? Well, befriending unstable people only brings trouble. Azerbaijan refused to participate in the CIS Economic Council because of a conflict with Putin. All this and more in detail right now. Subscribe and give us a like. And now, let's get started. The European Union has approved the 18th much-delayed package of sanctions against Russia. No sooner had they calmed Fico down than Orban started rebelling again. The Prime Minister of Hungary is threatening to pull the country out of the European Union. The State Department claims that Trump is seriously determined to put an end to Russia's war in Ukraine. And Keir Starmer is already prepared to send British deterrence forces to Ukraine. And the main question, who set up Trump? Who benefits from the new media scandal surrounding the American president? More on this and other topics in our international review.
Have the toughest sanctions against Russia really come into effect? The EU has approved the 18th package of sanctions. For the first time in history, the restrictions include lowering the price cap on Russian oil to $47.6 per barrel. But that's not all.
The introduction of the 18th package is in some way associated by many experts and economists with very tough measures against Russia. But it seems to me that at this point, it's too early to jump to conclusions about its effectiveness. Indeed, the price cap, lowering of the price cap on Russian oil and the blow to the Russian so-called shadow fleet are the two main aspects present in this package. And in principle, they look like rather painful blows to Russia and its economy in the long run.
For the first time, the sanctions package mentions a flag registry and Rosneft's largest oil refinery in India.
We are increasing pressure on the Russian military industry, on Chinese banks that enable sanctions evasion, and we are blocking the export of technologies used in drones.
Hungarian Prime Minister Orban stated that the country may leave the European Union if membership ceases to be beneficial. According to him, the EU is increasingly turning from an economic union into a political one. For now, Orban added, Budapest intends to remain within the union and push for change.
Well, that's pure absurdity, considering that his country's economy is subsidized, and today a large number of processes in the social sphere, infrastructure, and many other areas in Hungary itself are completely dependent on Brussels. Therefore, a real exit from the Union would not just be shooting oneself in the foot, but shooting oneself in the head for Orban's Hungary. Therefore, this statement should be viewed solely as an attempt at manipulation on his part.
Meanwhile, the US State Department stated that Trump will aggressively pursue his intentions and make firm decisions to end Russia's war against Ukraine.
He is certainly not happy, and I truly think his current actions taking decisive steps to provide Ukraine with more defensive weapons are a clear indication of his intentions.
Keir Starmer has announced that the deployment of deterrence forces to Ukraine is almost ready.
I am satisfied with the progress of the work, and other coalition members are also ready. These plans have now been developed as much as possible before the ceasefire comes into effect. That is why last week we held a meeting of the coalition of the willing to approve these plans.
According to him, several months ago, military planners from coalition countries developed plans to assist Ukraine in 4 areas: in the airspace, at sea, on land, and in strengthening the combat capability of the Ukrainian armed forces. But aren't they rushing things?
I would view the current situation with nothing but skepticism. And in general, yes, even against the backdrop of this significant political revival, this political leadership in Europe, both Starmer, Macron, and Merz still largely lack agency and the ability to make decisions without Washington's approval.
The Trump scandal. The Wall Street Journal published an article claiming that the US president allegedly may have sent an obscene letter to Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire convicted of sex crimes against minors. Trump himself denies this.
As for Trump himself, a huge number of different interested parties, both within the US and abroad, are searching for a lot of compromising material on Trump because it exists and they see it as an opportunity to put pressure on the White House.
Meanwhile, the Israeli army has once again shelled a city in southwestern Syria. An internal intertribal conflict has erupted within the country, and Israel has decided to intervene.
After the regime of Bashar al-Assad was overthrown in Syria and the new government took power, there was an agreement between Tel Aviv and representatives of the new Syrian authorities to establish a demilitarized zone on the border between the two countries. It's already been a year without any significant events. Syria did not withdraw its troops or its weapons, and the strike on the general staff was essentially Israel's final warning.
On the 16th of July, the Israel Defense Forces attacked the Syrian capital, Damascus. The strike targeted the buildings of the Syrian General Staff and the Presidential Palace. The same situation occurred with the Ministry of Defense building.
After the adoption of the 18th package of EU sanctions, Deputy Chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Alkogolovich Medvedev, unleashed yet another aggressive tirade, insulting European leaders and threatening new strikes against Ukraine. In his latest diatribe, he lashed out at Europe with a barrage of abusive phrases and classic Kremlin fantasies. He called European leaders dimwits, accused Germany and France of being nostalgic for the Third Reich and the Vichy regime, and singled out the Baltic states, Poland and the United Kingdom, calling them wretched, brazen and, pardon the expression, covered in their own filth. Medvedev paid special attention to the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. But here we won't quote him. He then started making threats, stating that strikes on targets in Ukraine, particularly in Kyiv, would continue with increasing intensity, and that victory over the Banderite regime was for him only a matter of time. Apparently, he must have already celebrated victory 3 times with half a liter each, before saying that, well, the hysteria of Putin's lackey is quite understandable to us. In Russia, for example, sanctions have already led to problems with repairing oil refineries. The head of the Ministry of Energy, Sergei Tsivilev, insists that the disruptions occurring at the plants are due to problems with equipment supplies. It fell under European sanctions as part of the very first package for the invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022. Let's take a closer look at all the details of the Russian Federation's rather bleak prospects.
Russian oil refineries are on the verge of shutting down and are experiencing a severe crisis.
There are unofficial indicators and no one disputes them. These are objective data.
Oil companies in the aggressor country are facing serious difficulties in repairing their refineries. This is due to problems with the supply of equipment, which fell under European sanctions back in February 2022, according to the head of the Russian Ministry of Energy, Sergei Tsivilev.
Repair timelines for the refineries are being pushed back due to delays and shortages of components. If, for example, 4 months were originally planned for repairs, now, due to sanctions, this period is increasing, and these delays have to be compensated for.
Russian oil refineries were built and modernized with the participation of European and American companies, which provided the plants with technology and software. Today, there are about 40 of these major refineries.
Oil refineries contain many technological components, many of which, let's say, for many years before the start of the full-scale war, were serviced by the world's leading oil service companies, most of which are based in the United States. There is a so-called Big Four of these oil service companies, which were the ones providing the services. Accordingly, with the start of the full-scale war, 2 problems immediately arose, among others. The first was the departure of these companies that serviced Russian refineries and knew what to do. And the second, of course, is that all these technological units were not produced in Russia, say, were all imported.
In the 2000s, up to 80% of equipment for oil refining was supplied from abroad. And even during Soviet times, equipment for refineries was purchased from the West. The switch to domestic equipment never happened, despite the government's import substitution policy.
This is a slow, so to speak, but dying out of industries, that is, what is happening now is simply that sometimes it gets written about more often, sometimes less, but essentially these processes are ongoing. Because of this inability to acquire the necessary equipment, and even when it is possible, the equipment becomes more expensive. Problems may arise in Russia, not only in less significant industries, but also in the main industry, which is the oil and gas sector. So right now...
To put it simply, Russia's oil prosperity is slowly but surely sinking.
If you don't have the necessary parts, it's very difficult to organize the refining process. So, for example, when there are attacks on Russian oil refineries, Many people say that what's important is not the dramatic footage, because the dramatic footage usually happens when a drone hits a storage tank. Yes, it explodes spectacularly, but technologically nothing is really damaged. But when a strike hits cracking units or other technological components that are actually responsible for processing crude oil into petroleum products, you won't get such dramatic footage, but it's the very foundation of the oil refinery that gets knocked out of operation.
Last year, oil processing volumes at Russian refineries fell to a 12-year low after a series of drone strikes disabled at least 10 of the largest plants. Some of them were forced to remain idle for months.
That's not
What is that exactly?
something there.
When Russia launched its full-scale war, its economy wasn't exactly perfect, but everyone understood that there were a few sectors that brought in money. As of today, essentially in the fourth year of the full-scale war, it is already being said that the metallurgical industry, which is the second most important after the oil and gas sector, will most likely have to halt production. In other words, the question of when the main oil and gas sector will come to halt, I think, is not some distant prospect. It could very well happen by the end of this year or next year.
And the oil reserves in Russia are gradually being depleted. Production costs are rising. The Russian central bank has already warned Kremlin officials about the threat of a collapse in the oil market, which would deal a blow to the economy.
There was already a precedent in September, if I'm not mistaken, of 2023, when, in order to optimize expenses, it was decided to reduce payments under the damper mechanism. What is the damper? The damper is a subsidy paid to fuel distributors for selling fuel in Russia instead of exporting it. In other words, they are compensated for the difference. And when they removed this damper subsidy for a short period of time, fuel disappeared from gas stations in several regions of Russia because the distributors decided it was better to hold on to it than to sell it. So in the oil industry, in Russia's oil industry, it's very important that this money comes from the budget so that there is some motivation for them to sell on the domestic market. And when that motivation is gone, problems arise even in the seemingly unshakable oil and gas sector.
The Russian budget depends on oil and gas revenues for a third of its income, and economic collapse would only be a matter of time.
During his visit to the Ukrainian capital, U.S. Special Representative Keith Kellogg was shown Western-made electronic components seized from Russian weaponry by specialists from the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
This was reported by the main intelligence directorate, which published the corresponding footage. Among the identified components is microelectronics that is critically important for the production of high-precision weaponry, which the Russian defense industry obtained through grey schemes, bypassing international sanctions, according to the main intelligence directorate. Kellogg was also shown Western components that had been extracted from Iranian and Russian kamikaze drones Shahed and Russian Geran, which the aggressor country Russia uses to terrorize Ukrainians. But the main purpose of Kellogg's visit to Kyiv was apparently a mega deal that could turn the tide of the war and is already, just in case, seemingly causing panic in the Kremlin. After all, Zelensky and Trump are discussing exchanging Ukrainian drones for American weapons. At the same time, Ukraine is offering its front line as a testing ground for foreign arms manufacturers. About this and about what is happening right now on the front line in our military review.
Despite heavy fighting, the situation on the Russian-Ukrainian front has stabilized. The enemy has not managed to break through in eastern Ukraine or in the Sumy region, according to the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation.
The plans of the Russian military and political leadership to create the so-called buffer zone have failed. This refers to the fact that, according to statements by the Russian dictator, the depth of the advance of Russian occupation forces in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions for the purpose of creating a buffer zone was supposed to be between 10 and 20 kilometers.
At the moment, the maximum advance of the occupiers in the Sumy region is up to 5 kilometers. Ukrainian defense forces have also managed in the Kharkiv direction to contain the offensive near the settlement of Milov and to halt the advance in the Vovchansk and Kupiansk directions. The presidents of Ukraine and the United States, Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump, are discussing a deal that involves the purchase of American weapons in exchange for the sale of Ukrainian drones.
Trump was made clearly aware of the potential to scale up the Ukrainian experience and the US military in response to the armies of European countries. It should be noted that Ukraine holds one of the leading positions in the global arms market, particularly in the development of technologies and the use of UAVs.
At a conference in Baden, Germany, Minister of Digital Transformation Mikhailo Fedorov presented the Test in Ukraine platform, which aims to attract as many partners as possible to create technologies that change the course of the war. According to Fedorov, foreign manufacturers of UAVs, MLRS, naval drones, electronic warfare systems, and AI-based products will now have a clear roadmap for testing their products in Ukraine.
This is a unique opportunity for Western manufacturers, our strategic partners, to be able to test the latest weapon systems directly in combat conditions. That is, to make adjustments and possible corrections to existing technologies.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz announced that Ukraine will receive Patriot air defense systems within the next few weeks. Agreements on their delivery are currently being negotiated at the level of the German and US Ministries of Defense. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are coming up with new ways to counter Russian fiber optic drones, which are difficult to jam with electronic warfare systems.
The positions of Ukraine's defense forces, including the movement of personnel and equipment, are covered with nets or wire, which makes it possible to neutralize specifically the threat of personnel or equipment being hit by fiber optic FPV drones. They simply get tangled up, but the main point is this: Ukraine's defense forces and the Ukrainian intelligence community, represented by the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, are carrying out preventive measures to prevent the large-scale production of fiber optic FPV drones directly on the territory of the occupying country.
And while Ukraine is on the defensive, Russia may soon face an offensive. The commander of the US Army in Europe and Africa, General Christopher Donahue, stated that if necessary, NATO is capable of capturing the Kaliningrad region in an extremely short period of time.
A very telling and shameful story. The main exhibition of Russian weaponry has been cancelled for the first time in 10 years. The Russian Ministry of Defense has decided to cancel the 11th Military Technical Forum Army, where Russian weapons are showcased. But apparently, by 2025, there will simply be nothing left to show.
It's been cancelled for the first time in 10 years. Moscow has decided to cancel the 11th Military Technical Forum Army, where Russian weapons are showcased. Although there was no official announcement, the event was removed from all posters. The exhibition was supposed to take place from the 11th of August to 14th in Patriot Park.
Well, these things happen. There's nothing you can do about it.
This is the main exhibition of the Russian Ministry of Defense, held annually since 2015 and positioned as a platform to showcase the latest ideas and developments of the Russian military-industrial complex. But apparently, this year the Ministry of Defense had nothing new to boast about.
There are certainly some specific problems present here. At the same time, Sergei Kuzhystovich and his colleagues have done a lot of work, but nevertheless, we need to keep this area constantly in focus.
Apparently, the focus has shifted somewhere else, since until now the event had never been cancelled, not even during the coronavirus pandemic. Previously, the forum lasted 7 days, but in 2024 its program was reduced to 3 days and attendance was restricted. This year, as we can see, the plans have changed completely.
The Russian defense industry is forced to admit that there is nothing to show the general public. The clearest proof of this is the freezing of the A-100 Premius project. These are long-range airborne early warning aircraft, which the Russian defense industry has been trying to revive for 15 years. The lack of funding has put an end to this project. This is the inability to implement the project to build an aircraft for domestic air transportation under the working name Baikal, which was announced by the Russian dictator. Again, the lack of funding has put an end to these projects as well.
Another reason for the cancellation of the exhibition is the collapse of Russian arms exports. In just the last 5 years, exports abroad have fallen by 64%, and the country's share of the global arms market has dropped to 7.8%.
A striking example is Russia's inability to fulfill the terms of supply under the so-called Indian contracts. This refers to the supply of the latest Russian tanks and accordingly the latest Russian fighter jets.
During the war, the Russian military-industrial complex has been depleted. Some enterprises have faced problems due to sanctions as well as a lack of funding.
A number of Russian defense enterprises have already declared de facto bankruptcy due to the lack of funding from the so-called state order.
Russian military equipment losses during the war in Ukraine are estimated at tens of thousands of units, including tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, aircraft, and helicopters. The actual losses are likely even higher.
Statements by Western media about the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex being able to produce heavy armored vehicles at the level of 1,200 to 1,500 units per year do not correspond to reality. The real capabilities of the Russian military-industrial complex are about 180 to 100 units of heavy armored vehicles, but considering the amount of armored vehicles destroyed by Ukrainian defense forces, that's a drop in the ocean.
Experts emphasize that the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex is currently engaged in restoring Soviet-era models of heavy armored vehicles.
The situation is similar in aircraft manufacturing. After the successful operation by Ukrainian special services, codenamed Web, during which strategic bombers were destroyed, the Russian side was forced to admit that at present the Russian Federation does not have the capability to build a new fleet of strategic bombers. In addition, the Russian side is forced to admit that when it comes to building new fighter jets for the Russian aerospace forces, namely the Su-34 and Su-35, up to 90% of the components used are imported.
And this is only a small part of what the Russian Federation is facing, and the further it goes, the harder it will be for their military-industrial complex to develop. And by the way, this is not the first event that the Kremlin has had to cancel. In 2023, for the first time in 30 years, Russia cancelled the MAX International Aviation and Space Salon. They promised to hold it in 2024, then postponed it to 2025, but it never took place.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping wants to arrange a trilateral meeting with US President Donald Trump and Russian leader Putin. According to The Times, there is speculation that Xi will invite Trump to a parade in China, marking the end of World War II in September. Putin will also be at this celebration, as he has already accepted the Chinese leader's invitation. As the publication notes, Trump and Xi Jinping have previously sent each other invitations for visits, although no dates have been set. The publication believes that a summit held as part of the military events would be a good reason for a meeting. However, Trump's advisors may persuade him not to agree to this visit, which would be a political triumph for the other two leaders, especially Xi Jinping, the publication writes. Therefore, Trump would likely prefer to meet with them on the territory of the United States of America. Azerbaijan has refused to participate in the CIS Economic Council due to its conflict with Putin. The reason for this decision is the recent events in Yekaterinburg. The Azal aircraft shot down by the Russians at the end of last year, and the Russian side's unwillingness to take adequate steps to resolve these issues. On the contrary, the undeclared war between Russia and Azerbaijan only continues. In Yekaterinburg, the son of a high-ranking Azerbaijani official has been arrested, while in Baku, concerts by Kremlin stars are being cancelled. Among them, by the way, is the traitor Ani Lorak. Where this standoff between Moscow and Baku will lead, watch further to find out. And don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel Ukraine Today.
The Kremlin is striking blow after blow. The conflict between Moscow and Baku continues. In Yekaterinburg, following his father, the head of the Ural-Azerbaijani diaspora, the son has also been detained. According to sources, the detainee was taken for questioning to the investigative committee. Ivan reminds us that at the beginning of July, when law enforcement officers were detaining Mutvala Shahin-Sheklinsky's father, his son reversed his car and hit one of the special forces officers. According to E1, the reason for the detention was causing harm to a law enforcement officer. The persecution of Azerbaijanis in the Russian Federation has been going on for more than a week now. Arrests, interrogations, revocation of citizenship and deportations have become routine. The head of the Azerbaijani diaspora in the Moscow region, Ilshan Ibragimov, has been deported from Russia to Azerbaijan. On the 4th of July, Ibragimov was stripped of his Russian citizenship. Hello, Ren Television. We would like to know why you chose not to comment on your departure from the Russian Federation, even though you will likely do so while in Azerbaijan.
I don't want to comment on anything. Let me leave in peace.
Some Azerbaijanis, like MMA fighter Javid Rzaev, are being punished retroactively. Back in 2024, the athlete insulted a Russian at one of the tournaments.
You Russian pig.
And just recently, a year after the insults, Javid was demonstratively stripped of his citizenship and deported. As it turned out, the Azerbaijani was deemed a threat to the national security of the Russian Federation.
In the central region of Russia, it was established that Javid Rzaev committed actions that negatively affect the political and social stability of society. These actions pose a threat to the national security of the Russian Federation.
Russian ultra-patriots and propagandists present these purges as a kind of act of justice. After all, in Azerbaijan, Russians are also being detained on suspicion of working for the FSB, and concerts by Russian stars are being cancelled en masse.
Hello, Baku. Yesenin is coming to you again on October 17th.
Baku really is cancelling the culture of the Russian world. In the near future, no Russian performers will be going to any concerts in Azerbaijan. The organizers of the popular Azerbaijani festival Dreamfest 2025 have removed all Russian artists from the program and replaced them with local performers. In particular, acts like Ruki Verrech, Klava Koka, Igor Krid, Ani Lorak, Alsu, Stas Pieka, and many others were supposed to perform. However, people in Russia forget that it was the actions of Russian law enforcement that sparked the conflict when, during mass detentions of people from Azerbaijan and Yekaterinburg, several Azerbaijanis were killed. The Prosecutor General of the Republic of Azerbaijan has initiated a criminal case regarding the use of torture and the particularly brutal premeditated murder of two people citizens of the Republic of Azerbaijan and individuals of Azerbaijani origin by officers of the law enforcement agencies of the Russian Federation. Z-patriots and official Kremlin propagandists have joined together in a unified impulse that is all too familiar to Ukraine. Solovyov started threatening Baku with Kyiv within 3 days.
We just have to raise an eyebrow and Ukraine will understand everything. With all due respect to Azerbaijan, its history and traditions, if Russia so much as raises an eyebrow for a second, we are, after all, Azerbaijan's third largest trading partner.
Lesser propagandists, following the example of Putin and Lenin, are casting doubt on the very existence of the Azerbaijani nation.
So I went and looked to see where the history of the Great Azerbaijan was, which was supposedly interrupted by the military intervention of the Russian Empire. I didn't find anything, there was no Azerbaijan at all. And in fact, I couldn't even find any mention of an ethnicity called Azerbaijanis there.
Putin's propagandists are angrily adding fuel to the fire, realizing that relations between Baku and Moscow, already left hanging in the air after the Azerbaijani plane was shot down over Chechnya, have now been completely destroyed.
In short, the policy of chauvinism and the open construction of Stalinism in Putin's Russia is truly frightening. Of course, Azerbaijanis do not want to risk their businesses with the FSB or with Putin's and the Russian Federation's reckless policies.
Moscow has been cast out of the strategically important Caucasus region. With Turkish support, Baku is establishing relations with Armenia as well as with Europe and China, bypassing the Kremlin in order to become, with Erdogan's backing, a connecting link between China and the European Union.